Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel called Zuzanareacts, where I learn all things power with your help, and I just share my Slovak Central European point of view. And today's video is about to be, I think, very interesting. So it's about the US and what happened in 1971, and the question is, did America back the right side? Let us uncover the shocking truth behind the gamble with Pakistan and what's impact of that has been on Pakistan and India. So let's hear it from Americans.
Please like this video and click on the subscribe button and turn on the notification. Thank you so much for your support.
I say, let's get into it.
Like most contemporary history, it starts after World War II, when the geopolitical chessboard was essentially reshuffled, particularly in South Asia, where we had new states of India and Pakistan. And this came at a time that the shadow of the Cold War was being cast over the region. The United States and the USSR were enlisting countries to their respective sides. And we went to South Asia, and India saw the US and the USSR trying to enlist these countries, and it said, you know what? We just had a couple hundred years of colonial rule. We have a lot of problems on our hands. You guys are talking about nuclear war. How about we just sit this one out? How about you just leave us alone for a little bit and let us try to develop this country and consolidate this massive democracy? We're going to be a part of the non-aligned movement and sit this one out as best we can. Pakistan put its hand up and said, I'm in the Western camp, sign me up. Pakistan saw that there was an opportunity here to receive diplomatic support from the United States, money, arms, superpower backing, if it was willing to cooperate against the Soviet Union, which it was. And the United States and Pakistan formed a military partnership, and the country allowed us to use military bases. We were flying drones, surveillance into the Soviet Union, and there was a limited tactical partnership that I would argue benefited both countries.
Can I just say one thing right here? I'm actually shocked. He's talking about drones in 1971. Has anyone registered that? Like, drones are a pretty recent thing. Clearly, 1971, they existed. What the fuck? Seriously, guys? Can you please tell me, many of you that, are very much into politics or, like, the technical stuff, like, what have we just uncovered? Like, I am like, what? Like, what? And he's just saying it like it's a day-to-day stuff. I thought drones are just a very recent thing. F me, seriously. I'm shocked. I'm legit shocked. And this is, well, it's just so hard to ever look into politics because you just never truly know what is going on. 1971, he's talking about flying drones to Soviet Union. Like, what? Please do let me know, like, what? What has just happened? Let's continue.
It seemed like a fair and reasonable deal for both of our countries. But there were, I would argue, two problems at the outset. The first is that there was a mismatch in expectations. From Pakistan's perspective, this wasn't just about support and arms and money. They believed that this also meant the United States would come and support us if we ever get into a conflict with India. And if they do get into a conflict with India, as they did in 1965 and in 1971, and America didn't come and help, even though we quite explicitly told them that wasn't part of the partnership, well, they were going to feel alienated, betrayed, and resentful toward the U.S. So resentful that after the 1971 conflict that split Pakistan up, they attempted to turn away from the West. They embraced more Islamist ideologies and identities. They embraced a nuclear weapons program and went down a more dangerous path. The second problem with this strategy was that it also alienated India to a great degree. So despite this partnership with Pakistan essentially being about the USSR, and we refused to join the conflicts, right? Restrictions on the weapons we're sending to Pakistan. We remain a major donor to India. We support India in the 1962 conflict with China. So we're trying to walk a fine line, but ultimately it doesn't matter because we're a superpower providing arms and weapons to Pakistan, which is India's arch nemesis. And the famous line that they still use today is, look, Pakistan isn't going to use those F-16s against terrorists. They're going to use them against us. So from our perspective, you are aiding and supporting our enemy. And you're doing so with diplomatic support in Kashmir. So essentially, we had a Cold War policy that got marginal tactical benefits from militarily partnering with Pakistan, but ultimately ended up alienating Pakistan anyway, and alienating its bigger neighbor, India. And it was because of this alienation, particularly after the 1971 conflict, particularly after we started pursuing diplomatic outreach to China, that India said, okay, America, these are your partners in the region, Pakistan and China. Our two arch nemeses are your friends in the region. I guess we have no other choice than to align with the Soviet Union. And that's what they did in 1971. They signed a defense pact with the Soviet Union. People want to know why non-aligned India seemed close to the Soviets during the Cold War. Why weren't they with the West? Why weren't they with the democracies? That's why. It's fairly simple to a rural Pennsylvanian. It seems very simple. Okay. So we had this policy early in the Cold War that essentially alienated both countries, including Pakistan, but the Soviets invade Afghanistan in the late 1970s, and suddenly we have a reason to cooperate again with Pakistan. We both have an interest in evicting the Soviets from Afghanistan. There are some popular myths about that conflict that I think are worth dispelling, because in the popular telling, particularly by my Pakistani friends, evil America came into the region, created the Taliban, created Al-Qaeda, created Islamist ideologies and extremism to defeat the USSR, and then we left. And
that is what I feel like you guys believe also on this channel, don't you? Because that's kind of like what Abhijit Chadva has mentioned. I think that I've done a video on this a while back. Let's see what he has to say.
We left Pakistan to deal with the mess. And frankly, all of their problems over the past 50 years are a result of evil America bringing this destruction to the region. Most of the assumptions that argument is based on are incorrect, okay? It was the Pakistani military that embraced Islamist ideologies and began spreading and supporting them before the Afghan war, after the Afghan war, for the last 50 years, okay? It was the United States giving money to the Pakistani government to give to whichever proxy militant groups they saw fit to fight in Afghanistan. So if it was channeled to extremist groups, it was because those were the Pakistani government's favored proxies in Afghanistan. We're talking about a relatively modest sum of money by today's standards, $1 to $2 billion a year. So this idea that this small sum of money 50 years ago is the source of all of the problems in the region is frankly not credible. And yet it remains a persistent narrative in Pakistan and beyond. So we're familiar with the Afghan conflict. Eventually we leave, again causing resentment in Pakistan because Afghanistan is thrown into civil war, Pakistan is facing problems, and in their mind, America left us again. They pursue their nuclear weapons program even further, and America levies sanctions on them for it. They engage in a nuclear proliferation ring to send nuclear technology to a rogues list of countries, Iran, North Korea, Iraq, and Libya. And they begin promoting terrorism in Kashmir. So we're estranged again in the 1990s. And Pakistan again feels what I wish Steve Cohen had never come up with this term, but what he called the condom syndrome. Used, abused, and discarded. Okay. Coming to contemporary times, 9/11 happens. Yet again, we go from being estranged to having another reason to pursue tactical cooperation with Pakistan. Yet another conflict in Afghanistan with major American interests at stake, and really only one partner country to pursue. Most of you are familiar with what happened in the Afghanistan war, all right? Pakistan allowed us to use their territory to supply our troops, to transit the country, to prosecute the war. Frankly, their territory was critical to launch counterterrorism operations from Pakistani soil. But at the same time, they played a double game, backing the Taliban, backing the Haqqani network, and backing our enemies. And I want to be very clear here. These were not nebulous, ill-defined links between the Pakistani government and the Taliban. This was the Pakistani military intelligence services and government providing medical care and safe haven to the Taliban leaders. Medical care and safe haven. This is the Pakistani establishment warning them before US drone strikes and operations against the militant groups. This is the Taliban Leadership Council operating openly in Pakistani cities. This is Osama bin Laden living comfortably a mile away from a Pakistani military academy. Okay? This is Americans coming home in body bags because Pakistan was playing a double game. It was, in my opinion, a failure of our imagination that this persisted for so long. Why did it persist for so long? Because they never paid a cost for doing so. We can maintain our proxies in Afghanistan, and we can keep the Americans on our side at the same time. Not just keep them on our side, they'll give us $30 billion to back the groups, our proxies in Afghanistan that are shooting their soldiers, so why on earth would we stop? We can have our cake and eat it too. And ultimately, I believe there's a lot of blame to go around. There are a lot of failures in Afghanistan. You want to know the number one reason we left in an embarrassing way under President Biden? It's because of the safe haven that the Taliban enjoyed in Pakistan. There are two things that I will say we have to consider in this dark equation, which is that one, Pakistan has also suffered from terrorism, a great deal, in fact. And really, it's the Pakistani civilians who have died at the hands of terrorists by the tens of thousands. Now, the natural instinct is to say, well, you made the bed, now you got to sleep in it. You're the one who's been supporting terrorism for decades, so you share the blame for this. And that's obviously, there's some truth to that. But there are 240 million people in Pakistan, right? More than in the UK, Germany, and France combined, or similar numbers. Not all these people deserve what has been thrust upon them by the Pakistani state, I would argue. Frankly, this is a country that needs better leaders and better leadership. And it's not going to be solved by the persistence of a victimhood narrative that all of our problems are not the fault of corrupt leaders, not the fault of a military that is playing behind the scenes as the puppeteer. They're the fault of someone else. It's India, which wants to invade Kashmir. No, India is over it. Okay? It's America, which meddled 50 years ago. No, it's your own government and your own military that have been propagating Islamist, militarist ideologies. So I think there needs to be a reckoning in Pakistan because it's really headed in the wrong direction. Now that we have essentially had a fundamental split with this country, they find themselves further and further in China's arms. And so you've got a nexus now of radicalism, economic depression, a growing debt trap to China. It's not a rosy picture. It's not a rosy story, but I hope that we take some important lessons away from it. And at least one important and positive step is that we've begun to double down on our relationship with India, which I think is strategically wise for a variety of reasons. And the fact that we haven't been closer to India for a longer period of time was really a casualty of this strange Cold War balance of power politics.
Wow. So now that was pretty insightful. I'm not so privy to Afghanistan war, so I can't really speak to that, but I would really like your point of view because what he's essentially saying, and I'll explain to you where I think he's coming from, that like obviously America goes where they can get their interest met, right? We talked about this many times. It's about your political interest, and that's pretty much it. And what he's saying that we just give money, and it's up to the internal government to do what they need to do with the money. So I guess I understand where he is coming from. But there are two things for me. One, so obviously the countries, and just because I worked with on African projects and I've done some research there on the perception of the Westerners, and what it transpired, at least in South Africa, was the fact that they really do not like the Westerners because they come in, they, let's say, offer aid and programs, but when they leave, this all goes to shit, because they're not trying to really understand the culture. And this is where I feel a lot of Western colonial countries, because Slovakia has nothing to do with that, for those that don't understand. We were never colonized, we were slaves to our surrounding nations. So I feel like there is definitely a certain level of arrogance, like we're better than, and we don't really need to understand. And it's also, I think, arrogance coupled with ignorance, and it is just, I think, so short-sighted, but maybe a bit hard, when you're surrounding with similar mentality of the big powers like US, UK, France, but also Spain, Portugal, colonized countries as well. So you're surrounded by similar mindsets. So you almost on just take it to a basic human levels. Like you come in touch with so many people, they share the same view of the world, and then you go somewhere and you expect that's the same. But that's just a failure. And I think it's more and more apparent these days, over the last maybe 5-6 years, where people are really starting to understand that there are huge differences between cultures. And it's not just my model of the world and my reality applies exactly the same somewhere else. And so it's a failure of the US to even trying to understand what's happening in the country and what the culture is. And there is not a really a proper how do you say that? You know what I mean? Intersection, or you can't combine the two, and you're not trying. And that, I feel like it's an arrogance coming from the Western countries, especially colonial countries. And that, I feel like, based on what he's saying, has majorly backfired. And I understand, because they might be, I understand where he is coming from. He says, we just give you money, you do what you want with that. As it's kind of like a business level, if you're right now in a VC fund investor and you have the money and you just basically, you want to invest into something, and a cool startup, but you invest in maybe 15 or 20, you give people money, and then you're hoping to get a return on investment, but you really do not interfere. You maybe have calls here and there with the CEOs of those companies, but in reality, you're just giving them stuff and you're kind of washing your hands, because your investments are all over. But I wonder if that's kind of really what happened, because I don't know. We all know about NGOs that are sponsored by particular parties from the West. And I feel like the interference, if it was just like that, I'm personally not really buying it, because I feel like when you're giving someone money, you must be installing also your people to overseeing that. Or maybe if they're not your people, there are people that maybe share your values, or they want to be liked by you, and everything just really does come, because I feel like maybe in politics people they're more dehumanizing, or not appreciating the human psychology behind all of this, and how it does actually come to an each individual person level. That there is not a big conspiracy behind it, but it just it really does come to individual human, what are their values, etc. And that's how they approach that. So I think it's a bit alibistic. I feel like America would have their people on the ground, or if they're not, like, but you don't have, like, I'm not talking about like from a conspiracy theory that you now install people, which you might on one hand, but on the other hand, I think the approach is more realistic. Like, we're just gonna utilize people that are already in favor of us. So we're going to focus on them. We're going to give them the money. And we're hoping that we've built enough good relationships that they're going to do stuff. Although I still believe that there might be, like, when they're at the install people, I still feel like there might be people saying, like, not like in a, like threatening way, but they're saying, well, we need this policy passed, and I'm sure you appreciate our agreement. And in our agreement, we have agreed X, Y, and Z. And we're unsure if you take this action, if we're able to fulfill our part of the agreement. I believe this is exactly how it happens. I don't think that is like now, hat to the gun and, like that kind of a speech. I think it's more like what I've just explained. So it's a very interesting take. It's a very interesting analysis, considering what I mentioned earlier in the video, that what Abhijit Chatwa has said in his videos, and you guys have supported that, I believe, is that it's all like the fault of the US, that they have sponsored it. And on one level, it's correct, but I feel like that there are more levels behind that. So I would be very curious, what's your take on this? And now, obviously, your relationships are with the US are improving, and it's just very, very clear that America just does what America needs to preserve their country's interests, and that's it. And I think that maybe like India is now doing the same, right? I think that you mentioned that to me. So correct me if I'm wrong, but very interesting. I would love to know your thoughts on this one, actually. Like, how do you view that in the context of Abhijit Chatwa and what he's talked about in Taliban in a podcast around the year? And with that being said, thank you so much for watching this video with me. If you did enjoy, please give a thumbs up, share, like, and subscribe to this channel. And I will see you in the next one. Until then, I'm sending peace and love. Bye-bye.